December 1st, 1960. Lodi, Democratic Republic of the Congo. The convoy cuts through the darkness along the dirt road between Leopoldville and Stanleyville. 3 vehicles, headlights bouncing off the dense jungle pressing in from both sides. In the second car, Patrice Lumumba sits in the back seat, his white shirt wrinkled, his face set with grim determination. His wife Pauline is beside him, their infant son asleep in her arms. He knows they're coming. He's known since he left the Capitol Underhouse arrest 4 days ago. Then, brake lights flare red ahead. The convoy jerks to a halt. Soldiers emerge from the tree line. Congolese army troops loyal to Colonel Mobutu. Their boots crunch on gravel as they surround the vehicles, rifles raised. An officer approaches Lumumba's car, yanks the door open. The interior light spills across Lumumba's face. 35 years old, eyes defiant even now. Out! Now! Lumumba doesn't move immediately. He looks at Pauline, at his sleeping child. Then he steps onto the road. The December heat wraps around him like a fist. More soldiers close in, their faces hard, unreadable. They've been told this man is dangerous, a communist, a radical, a threat to the new nation barely 6 months old. "You have no authority to detain me," Lumumba says, his voice steady, carrying the same cadence that once electrified crowds. "I am the prime minister of this country." A rifle but slams into his shoulder. He staggers but doesn't fall. They grab his arms, wrench them behind his back. Pauline screams from the car. The baby wakes, crying. Lumumba doesn't resist as they bind his wrists with rope, the fibers cutting into skin. They drag him to a military truck, waiting in the shadows. Other prisoners are already inside, members of his cabinet, allies arrested in the purge. The tailgate slams shut. Through the canvas, Lumumba can hear Pauline's voice fading as the truck lurches forward, back toward the capital, back toward his enemies. He knows what this means. In the chaos of Congo's independence, the mutinies, the Belgian intervention, the secession of Katanga province, he has made too many enemies. Mobutu's coup, the Western powers who fear his refusal to choose sides, the mining companies who see his nationalism as theft. The truck rumbles through the night, carrying the man who dared to demand that Congo's wealth belonged to Congolese hands. 18 months earlier, Patrice Lumumba was nobody the world had heard of. He'd been born in 1925 in Kasai province, the son of a farmer, part of the Tetela ethnic group. While Belgium grew fat on Congolese rubber, copper, diamonds, and uranium, while King Leopold's ghost still haunted the forced labor camps and severed hands of the previous generation, Lumumba worked as a postal clerk in Stanleyville. He read voraciously, learned French, wrote poetry and political essays that circulated in mimeograph sheets among the educated Congolese elite. By 1958, he'd founded the movement National Congolese, the MNC, not a tribal party, not a regional movement, a national party demanding one thing Belgium had never offered: complete independence. The colonial authorities arrested him in 1959 on charges of inciting riots. They released him in 1960 only because they had no choice. The wave of African independence was crashing across the continent, and Belgium wanted out before the blood started. They scheduled elections. Lumumba's MNC won the largest share. June 30th, 1960. Leopoldville, Independence Day. The ceremony takes place in the Palais de la Nation. Belgian King Baudouin sits in regal splendor, delivering a speech praising his country's civilizing mission in the Congo. He speaks of Belgium's generosity, its benevolence, its reluctance to abandon the Congolese people to their fate. President Joseph Kasavubu responds with careful, diplomatic words. Then Lumumba rises. He wasn't scheduled to speak. This is a breach of protocol. But he walks the microphone anyway, and the room falls silent. "Men and women of the Congo," he begins, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We have known ironies, insults, blows that we had to endure morning, noon, and night because we were Negroes." The Belgian delegation stiffens. King Baudouin's face hardens. Lumumba doesn't stop. He speaks of forced labor, the assassinations, the land stolen, the resources extracted. He speaks of independence not as a gift from Belgium, but as a right seized by Congolese hands. "We are no longer your monkeys," he declares. The speech electrifies the Congolese audience. It horrifies the Belgians. It terrifies the Americans watching from Washington, where the CIA has already opened a file on this unpredictable nationalist who refuses to declare himself anti-communist. Within days, the army mutinies. Belgian troops intervene. Katanga province, home to the richest copper mines in Africa, secedes under Moise Tshombe, backed by Belgian mining interests and white mercenaries. Lumumba appeals to the United Nations, but when they refuse to help him crush the secession, he turns to the Soviet Union for assistance. That's when the decision is made in Brussels, in Washington, in the boardrooms of Union Miniere du Haut-Katanga. Patrice Lumumba cannot be allowed to survive. August 1960. Leopoldville, the American Embassy. CIA Station Chief Lawrence Devlin sends an encrypted cable to Director Allen Dulles in Washington. The message is direct. Lumumba's removal is an urgent and prime objective. President Eisenhower agrees. In a National Security Council meeting, the question isn't whether to eliminate Lumumba, it's how. The CIA begins planning. They consider poison. Dulles personally approves sending a scientist with toxic substances to the Congo, lethal viruses, bacteria designed to incapacitate or kill. The tubes and vials arrive in diplomatic pouches. Devlin receives orders. This man must go. But the Americans aren't working alone. In Brussels, the Belgian government watches Lumumba with equal horror. He threatens to nationalize Union Miniere, the mining conglomerate that has extracted billions in wealth from Katangan copper. Belgium's economic survival depends on those mines. Foreign Minister Pierre Wigny coordinates with Katanga's secessionist leader Moise Tshombe. They need a Congolese solution, someone who can remove Lumumba without foreign fingerprints on the trigger. They find their man in Colonel Joseph Desire Mobutu, 30 years old, a former army clerk turned force commander. Mobutu met with CIA officers throughout the summer. The Americans provide cash, tens of thousands of dollars stuffed into bags. Mobutu uses it to pay soldiers, secure loyalty, build his power base. September 14, 1960. Mobutu stages his coup. He doesn't call it that. He calls it neutralization, suspending both Lumumba's government and the opposition. But Lumumba remains in his official residence under UN protection, still dangerous, still defiant. He gives interviews to journalists. He sends messages to his supporters in Stanleyville. He refuses to disappear quietly. For 3 months, it's a stalemate. Mobutu controls the capital but can't touch Lumumba while UN peacekeepers guard a residence. The Americans grow impatient. The Belgians grow anxious. Tshombe waits in Katanga, his European mercenaries and loyalist gendarmes ready. Then Lumumba makes his move. Late November, he slips past the UN guards, escapes Leopoldville, and flees towards Stanleyville where his supporters still hold power. If he reaches them, he could rally the country, split the nation into civil war, invite Soviet intervention. The CIA tracks his movements. Mobutu's troops pursue. They catch him on December 1st. Now, as a truck carries him back to Leopoldville, the conspiracy tightens like a noose. Mobutu holds him in military barracks. The UN Security Council debates his fate. The Soviets demand his release. The Americans and Belgians work behind the scenes, pushing, coordinating, ensuring the outcome they need. Lumumba is beaten daily. Soldiers parade him before cameras, his face swollen, his shirt torn. The images broadcast across the world, humiliation as political theater. But he's still alive, still too visible, still too dangerous in Leopoldville where journalists and diplomats can witness his treatment. The solution becomes clear to all conspirators. Lumumba must be transferred Katanga, to Tshombe's territory, where Belgian advisors control the apparatus and foreign witnesses are few. On January 17, 1961, they put him on a plane. January 17, 1961. Njili Airport, Leopoldville. The DC-4 transport plane waits on the tarmac, engines idling in the afternoon heat. Soldiers drag Patrice Lumumba across the concrete, his hands bound behind his back with wire that cuts into his wrists. With him are 2 of his closest allies, Maurice Mpolo, former Minister of Youth and Sports, and Joseph Okito, Vice President of the Senate. All three have been held in military custody for 6 weeks. All three know what this transfer means. They're forced up the stairs into the plane's cargo hold. Inside, Katangan gendarmes wait, Chambe's men, flown in specifically for this transport. These soldiers have no loyalty to Congo's capital, no memory of Lumumba's speeches, no hesitation in their orders. The beatings begin before takeoff. Rifle butts crash into ribs. Boots slam into kidneys. Lumumba curls on the metal floor, try to protect his head. Mpolo shouts in protest. A gendarme breaks his jaw with a pistol grip. Okido is silent, blood streaming from his nose. The plane lifts off. Through the small windows, Leopoldville shrinks below. The city Lumumba entered in triumph 7 months ago as prime minister of a newborn nation. Now he leaves it broken, bound, being delivered to his executioners. The flight takes 2 hours. The entire time, the beatings continue. Between blows, the Katangan soldiers spit on the prisoners, force them to eat paper smeared with engine grease, tear at their clothes. A Belgian officer aboard, Captain Julian Gat, watches but does not intervene. He's there to ensure the transfer proceeds smoothly, nothing more. He takes photographs for documentation. When the plane descends toward Elizabethville, Katanga's capital, Lumumba is barely conscious. His left eye is swollen shut. Several teeth are broken. Blood soaks through his torn shirt. The landing is rough. The cargo door opens to reveal a waiting convoy. Military vehicles surrounded by Katangan soldiers and white mercenaries hired by Chambe's regime. The Belgians stand out in their pressed uniforms, their clean weapons, their casual authority over the African troops. Belgian Police Commissioner Franz Verscher is there. So is Commissioner Gabriel Michaels. They've coordinated with Katangan Interior Minister Godefroid Munongo, a fierce opponent of Lumumba, who has publicly called for his death. The prisoners are dragged from the plane and thrown into a truck. The convoy doesn't head toward Elizabethville's prison. Instead, it drives into the bush, onto rough roads leading away from the city, away from witnesses, away from any pretense of legal process. They stop at a house, Brouwer's house, an isolated villa 40 kilometers from the capital. It's past midnight now, January 18th. The prisoners are pulled from the truck and forced into a bare room. Lumumba can barely stand. Mpolo and Okido supported between them. For 3 hours they wait. Outside, the execution squad assembles. Katangan soldiers under Belgian command. 3 firing squads, 1 for each prisoner. The logistics are discussed calmly. Where to position men, how to dispose of the bodies afterward, who will give the final orders. Inside the room, Lumumba speaks quietly to his companions. He knows there will be no trial, no international intervention, no last-minute rescue. He spent his final weeks in captivity writing letters that will never be sent, maintaining his dignity despite the torture, refusing to beg. Around 9:30 p.m. on January 17th, though some accounts say the early hours of January 18th, the door opens. Belgian officers enter. Commissioner Verscher, Captain Gat. With them, Katangan officials, including a man later identified as Police Commissioner Verscher's deputy. They order the prisoners outside. The night air is thick with humidity. Insects swarm around the lights of the vehicles parked in a semicircle, their headlamps illuminating 3 trees at the edge of the clearing. Lumumba, Mpolo, and Okido are pushed forward, stumbling on the uneven ground. Belgian Captain Julian Gat steps forward with rope. They bind each man to a separate tree, facing outward toward the firing squads. Lumumba's head hangs forward. He can barely hold it up after the beatings. But when Katangan Interior Minister Godefroid Munongo approaches, reading a fabricated execution order, Lumumba lifts his eyes. "You will not silence the people," he says, his voice hoarse but clear. "History will have its say." Munongo nods to the Belgian officers. Commissioner Franz Verscher gives a command. The firing squads, composed of Katangan gendarmes under Belgian supervision, raise their rifles. 3 squads, 4 men each, positioned 15 feet from their targets. The volley shatters the night. 12 rifles fire nearly simultaneously. The sound echoes across the bush. Sharp cracks followed by the heavier thuds of bullets tearing through flesh and bark. Lumumba's body jerks against the ropes. Mpolo slumps immediately. Okito's tree shudders with impact. But they're not dead. Not all of them. The soldiers approach. Lumumba is still breathing, blood bubbling from his chest. A Belgian officer, later identified as Commissioner Verscher, draws his pistol and fires point-blank into Lumumba's head. 2 more shots from Polo, 1 for Okito. Silence returns to the clearing, broken only by the idling engines and the sound of someone vomiting. One of the younger Katangan soldiers. Overcome, the Belgian officers immediately begin to cover up. They cannot leave the bodies intact. Lumumba's face is too recognizable, his death too politically explosive. If the bodies are found, if journalists photograph them, if the United Nations investigates, the conspiracy will unravel. Belgium's involvement must be erased. Chambe's regime must have deniability. Commissioner Verscher and Police Commissioner Gerard Sout receive their orders, make the bodies disappear completely. They cut down the corpses and load them into a truck. They drive through the night to a remote location near the Lufa River. There, using tools prepared in advance, they begin the gruesome work. First, they hack the bodies into pieces with saws and machetes, limbs separated from torsos, heads removed. The butchery takes hours in the darkness, the Belgians working methodically while Katangan soldiers stand guard. Then comes the acid and fire. They brought drums of sulfuric acid and containers of gasoline. The body parts are doused in acid, the flesh sizzling and dissolving, the chemical stench overwhelming. What the acid doesn't destroy, they burn. A funeral pyre constructed from the remains of the men who demanded Congo's freedom. By dawn on January 18th, almost nothing remains. Some fragments of bone, teeth scattered in the ash. So will later claim he kept 2 of Lumumba's teeth as souvenirs, a grotesque trophy he stored for decades. The official story is prepared carefully. On February 13, 1961, nearly a month after the execution, Minongo announces that Lumumba escaped custody and was killed by hostile villagers in Kasai province. The lie is transparent but useful. The UN demands an investigation. Western governments express polite concern while privately celebrating the outcome. Belgium denies involvement for 40 years. The CIA files remain classified. Mobutu seizes full power in 1965, ruling as dictator for 3 decades with American support, growing fantastically wealthy while Congo, renamed Zaire, descends into kleptocracy and collapse. But Lumumba's words survive. His independent speech, his letters from prison, his vision of an Africa free from foreign control, where resources benefit African people, where dignity matters more than compliance. In 2002, Belgium finally admits complicity in his murder. In 2022, a single tooth, kept by Sout's daughter after his death, is returned to Lumumba's family and buried in Kinshasa. The Democratic Republic of Congo has never known the peace Lumumba fought for. The wars continue. The minerals flow outward. The wealth accumulates elsewhere. But on January 17th every year, Congolese remember the man who stood before King Baudouin and refused to be grateful for independence. The man who demanded that freedom means something real. The man whose body they destroyed because his ideas were indestructible. Patrice Lumumba, 35 years old, first Prime Minister of the Congo, murdered for believing his country belonged to its people.